And now, the person we've all been waiting for to talk about the wonderful decision that has come down in our great town, Joey Mogul of the People's Law Office. Good morning to you, Joey.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, it wasn't that long ago that you and I and Alderman Moore had a meeting talking about reparations for the victims of torture. And I know that kind of a meeting went on with aldermen around the city. And we heard right after the election was over that the movement to bring about reparations for the victims of torture has actually become a reality here in Chicago. And you, I know, did a lot of work with the Chicago Torture Justice Memorial. And tell us what's going on and what we are grateful about today.
Well, we're really in a historic moment here in the city of Chicago. Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, along with Amnesty International, after an amazing campaign co-led by We Charge Genocide and Project NIA, we have finally reached an agreement with the city of Chicago to provide reparations to the Burge torture survivors and their family members. It's the first time any city throughout the nation has provided reparations for racist police violence. So it's truly remarkable. It's an entire reparations package that includes not only financial compensation to Burge torture survivors, but psychological counseling services to the survivors and family members, free enrollment in city colleges to the survivors, their immediate family members, as well as their grandchildren. It is going to be required that the Burge torture cases be taught in Chicago public schools, as well as issues of police brutality and police accountability and the limits of the U.S. Constitution. Many people are really excited about that. And it provides and it will include as well a permanent public memorial about the Burge torture cases here in the city of Chicago, as well as other benefits and remedies to try to help the torture survivors themselves.
I appreciate the comprehensive nature of this settlement, because all I read in a heavy news week was $5.5 million, which I know from previous conversations we've had even on this show is about a quarter of what you were originally looking for. Is that going to be enough money, even with all these other ancillary services and benefits that you negotiated?
Well, originally the ordinance asked for a minimum of $20 million, but that was to include the whole holistic package. So it wasn't just the financial compensation, it was everything else that we were asking for. And specifically, we were asking for and we received a counseling center on the south side of Chicago, right? Because as you all know, in Rogers Park, there is a specific counseling center called the Kovler Center.
Yeah, victims of torture.
For victims of torture, but because of the federal funding they receive, they can only provide those services for people tortured outside the United States. And it's again part of our U.S. government's failure to recognize.
We may train the torturers here, but they do it somewhere else. Right.
But that said, when police officers and guards and prison officials torture people as well, we just don't call it torture. We call it brutality, but it in fact is torture. We provide no services to the black and brown people who are tortured within the United States. And so that is one of the things that we receive. So back to the money issue, the 5.5 definitely is a significant reduction in what we were able to get. Will it be enough? It will be some, I believe, measure of financial compensation that is meaningful. It is the best we can do in light of the financial constraints that the city is under at this time. And when this deal and this negotiation was on the table, we consulted with the torture survivors and we asked them, do you want us to go ahead and take this? And every single one of them said yes. Something is better than nothing. So was it everything we hoped for? No. But it is 5.5 is just the financial compensation, and the city will be paying more for the other forms of redress.
One of the things that I think you might want to clarify for people, because we've had a lot of people get let out of prison for wrongful convictions as well as torture, but some people got big settlements. This really takes care of the people who did not get settlements.
Exactly. Well, to be clear, the people who've gotten multi-million-dollar settlements, they're not going to be able to partake in this.
Okay.
But there were individuals like Darryl Cannon, who after he was tortured and forced to confess, and his confession was being used against him in his criminal case, he sued from his jail cell. right? I mean, courageously spoke up on his own behalf to say, hold the city accountable, to hold, the officers he accuses accountable. He settled in the 80s when the bulk of this evidence had not come to light for $3,000. In this case, he's going to be able to partake in the financial compensation. Each of the torture survivors will be able to get the same share, and so he's going to be able to get part of that share minus whatever he settled for. And you're right, let me just be clear. This compensation package is essentially for the vast majority of torture survivors who never had an opportunity to sue. And because the city and the Burge and all the other officers covered up this racist police pattern and practice of torture, they were unable to sue, and the statute of limitations expired. This now provides them with financial compensation that they had no legal recourse to get.
The mayor was clearly anxious to settle this. You even got a formal apology on behalf of the city from the mayor, which I'm not sure any of us thought we would actually hear those words. But the perpetrator, or at least the symbol of this torture, Mr. Burge, from his retirement pensioned home in Florida, had some different comments. How did you react to what he had to say about this settlement?
To be honest with you, it was vile and reprehensible what I believe he said, and I think it's truly sad that he hasn't really decided to reflect on everything that's been done and to really take responsibility for his actions. I think Anthony Holmes, one of John Burge's torture survivors, said it best, that he's truly a sad individual. I think he's been discredited. He had his opportunity in court to defend himself against the perjury and obstruction of justice that he was charged for and ultimately convicted of. And he was held accountable for the lies and denials he made about the torture cases. And so the fact that he's now lashing out against this reparations package is not totally surprising, but I don't give it a lot of weight. As Flint Taylor likes to say, he's a serial torturer, and he's not been held. Unfortunately, he does not want to change his ways.
Do you have any sense of what regular cops on the beat, what they might think about this? As much as being an activist, I was in opposition to the police. I know that there are certainly policemen and women who do a good job, and not like we don't need police. I'm just wondering what any hint as the rank and file's view on not only the reparations decision, but also the general climate in the country, where all of a sudden we've got, every day there's a new kid or someone getting killed by a cop going rogue.
Well, okay, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I believe all of the police officers are consistent or they're monolithic. I mean, there are many people who still support John Burge and the white detectives under his command. The Fraternal Order of Police has obviously supported Burge and all the other detectives for decades. I'm sure there are many police officers who are very upset. I mean, even back in the 80s, there was an anonymous police source who came forward and wrote letters to the People's Law Office exposing this torture ring and exposing what's going on. And so there were other officers who really hated what Burge and others did and believed that they were staining the police department. So I think it's a mixed bag. But in terms of what you're saying as rogue officers, I think we have to really look at this moment and realize that we are seeing what people have seen for a long time, which is these systemic police practices that are racist. And and this is coming to light in post Ferguson and post the death of Eric Garner. I think here in Chicago, we've really been addressing this. We Charge Genocide's been addressing this around stop and frisk, and we've been dealing with this in the Burge torture cases. I think we can't just claim that this is just a bunch of rogue officers. No,
I didn't mean to imply that it was just a few.
Yeah,
it is a policy, and the way it's structured, and probably ideology figures in. We used to have Renault Robinson in the Afro-American Patrolmen's Association, too, so we did have a progressive force within the police. Let me ask you, there's a lot of press in Chicago on this. What's any national press yet?
Oh, there's been a huge amount of national press. This was on NPR nationally. This was I saw this in the Washington Post. This was in USA Today. We've also had the Guardian weigh in on this. I mean, I think actually the national press has been better than the local press on this because they understand.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah, they understand what a huge historic national moment this is. I mean, for the city of Chicago to really not only provide redress, but to really recognize and apologize for this racist torture is huge. Often, I'm a lawyer and I sue on behalf of people, and the city will settle, but they will never admit wrongdoing.
Right.
And so that, in and itself, that we're getting this official apology and this official recognition of what occurred here in African American communities is huge. And I think that what we are seeing, and I want to be really clear, this moment is here today due to decades of activism, investigative journalism, and really hard-fought litigation. But specifically, the last 5 months, it's been Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, Amnesty International, Project NIA from Rogers Park, and We Charge Genocide really coming together, launching this campaign, which has been intergenerational, interracial, and truly homegrown grassroots activism that I believe really made this happen.
Hallelujah.
Given the 20-plus years of work here, is this a template for post-Gardner, post-Ferguson resolution of the growing public awareness of this pattern of racism?
I absolutely believe so. I mean, I'm connected with a lot of police brutality activists across the country, and I do think that people are truly inspired by this. Because the reality is often we see this racist police violence occur, and people think that the only resolution is going back to the same system and trying to prosecute the officer. And to be honest with you, we've seen how often that fails. But what's so, I think, inspiring, and people have really grabbed in the reparations ordinance, is that it actually is trying to meet the real needs of the victims and their family members and their communities, and recognizing that this type of police violence doesn't just hurt the victims, but it seeps and damages the entire family and community. And so I think that we are going to start seeing, I'm hoping that we start to see other activists around the country maybe use this as a model to really try to figure out how to deal with systemic police violence. And it's another form of accountability that holds the city and the system responsible while actually providing for the needs of the victims.
You talked about one former victim and his very modest settlement in the 80s. I know it would be hard to talk about the whole group, but can you talk a little bit about how other survivors are coping? What are their lives like now? Many served time for crimes they didn't commit. Others served time for maybe crimes that they had some involvement with, but the tortured confessions added to their time in prison. So there are a lot of different kinds of cases, but can you talk a little bit about how the survivors are in fact surviving today?
Well, sure, I will. I mean, I'll tell you, every single survivor I have spoken to has told me that they have not recovered from the torture they endured, that they have nightmares, they have flashbacks. When they have to talk about the torture, it makes them shake. Even Darryl Cannon, who's been one of the most courageous and outspoken torture survivors, who's not only spoken on his behalf, but those who are still behind bars, it makes him sick to have to talk about it. It makes his stomach upset. And, the reality is there's been no services for them whatsoever, no psychological counseling services, no support systems out there. And so they're still suffering. And that is why I believe this reparations package is so important, because it starts to provide some of those services that may help start some healing, but certainly could provide them some strategies for coping.
You did a wonderful shout out to these other organizations that have been advocating around this issue, but the People's Law Office really is the entity that pushed this for so many years. What do you guys get out of this? I mean, lawyers need to pay rent and cover litigation costs, and so was there something? You have a lot of skin in this game. Did you get
Right.
something back as a result of the settlement?
No, we don't get a dime, and I'm glad about that, and that's exactly the way it should be. And when I drafted the ordinance, it was not in any way, shape, or form for us to get any financial compensation whatsoever.
Mayor's not going to take you out to dinner or lunch? Or?
I got to fire a few questions at you. Mark Brown talked about he can try to connect the dots between the Burge torture cases, the Kochman case, and the kid McDonald who got 16 bullets and killed. He didn't mention Holman Square. I'm wondering, you got any comments on the Holman Square issue?
Well, I thought Mark Brown's piece was really great, and I'm really glad he connected the dots. And the reality is when we fail to fully investigate and address and take accountability for the torture we've seen, it provides impunity for officers to continue to doing that. And that's what Mark Brown's piece was, saying because we didn't deal with the Burge torture cases properly at the time they were occurring or decades thereafter, that taught officers that they can continue to do these things. As for Holman Square, I think we absolutely need to have an independent investigation into these allegations and get to the bottom of what really is happening there. And these just straight out denials is truly, that's not enough. Let's have an investigation. Let's get to the heart of the matter.
Joy Mogul, you mentioned stop and frisk, and I saw somewhere flashed before my eyes that actually stop and frisk is more of a reality and a bigger problem here in Chicago than in New York, where they've mitigated that process.
Yes, I mean, the ACLU just came out with a report, and they found that there were more people who were stopped here in Chicago than in the height of it going on in New York City. And the reality show that this is affecting black youth here in the city. Right now, we currently do not have the same systems in place to track the data so that we could determine the depth and breadth of how many of our young black men and women are being stopped and frisked on a daily basis, right? And I think what we forget is that this is a deeply humiliating process that is traumatizing for people as well. And it affects a huge more amount of people than we see in other types of police violence cases. I believe We Charge Genocide is really taking this issue up, and they are really going to take it on. And I really look forward to seeing their organizing in the months ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of winning over the city council on this as much as went on? I mean, I know you and I were in a meeting early, but there were other aldermen, and there were a few, and I imagine there were a bunch more that came along.
Sure.
Share that.
And well, first, I want to thank you, Michael, for putting us in contact with Alderman Moore, and that was really important for us. Alderman Moore did help us.
He did a good job on this one.
I really want to acknowledge Alderman Joe Moreno. He was the chief sponsor who used to work with the Burge torture survivors back in the day and was in the campaign to end the death penalty and had personal friendships with family members. He did an amazing job really championing this ordinance. Howard Brookins as well. But really it was this grassroots campaign of Chicago Torture Justice Memorials. We went door to door and talked to, knocked on offices, did it the old-fashioned way. Alderman Roderick Sawyer came on early on. It was a real big supporter of us, but it really was doing it the old-fashioned way, meeting with aldermen door to door. And so, over time, by September, we had about 25 alder people who had signed on. And as we sit here today, we have a total of 29 individuals. I want to shout out, we've also had a lot of organizations come together to really help us go meet with alder people. Even in Uptown, we had a bunch of youth groups come together who really made that happen.
Joey, part of the settlement included a memorial.
Right.
Share some information on what that might look like and what you would like it to look like.
Well, we have a lot of ideas. Chicago Torture Justice Memorials, in fact, started in 2012 as a group of artists and activists and lawyers coming together saying, how do you memorialize these cases? How do you deal with the ugly racism involved in these cases while also paying recognition to the struggle for justice? And so we had an art show that had over 70 memorials or ideas for memorials submitted, and that was at the School of the Art Institute. And we've had a range of different art shows and exhibits displaying these different memorials. So to be honest with you, it could be a range of things, from a park with benches, it could be a library and an archive, which we are really hoping that's provided for. We've had people talk about having it be a song. We've had people talk about being poems. I mean, while the city at this point is committing to one public memorial, I want to defer to the torture survivors and family members as to what they want and what they look like, but I don't want us to pretend that that's going to be the one and only thing. We have been memorializing this as we move along, and we will continue to do so that we can make sure that this is inscribed in Chicago's history.
If people want to find out more about the memorial plans or other things that are coming, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, certainly, please check out Chicago Torture Justice Memorial's website. It's chicagotorture.org. And also, you can reach out to us at justicememorials@gmail.com. And also, you can always find us at the People's Law Office. We can always get you in touch with CTJM.
Well, you're pretty inspirational, Joey, I got to say. You know, I've had a number of quiet conversations with you, but I didn't ever hear you really go into the details with such enthusiasm, and I'm almost in tears over here. So thanks so much for coming on, and keep up the good work. We all know that the struggles are going to continue. There's a lot of other fronts that we got to deal with, and this is just an initial step forward.
And congratulations to you and Flint and all the other folks that got this settlement actually negotiated.
Great, I thank you. And one last thing, I just want to put a shout out to Stan Willis and Black People Against Police Torture, because they were the ones who really first thought of the idea of reparations, and we just kind of followed in their footsteps.
Well, I think the whole concept of reparations should get broadened. We need reparations for many more things. Next week.